In the shadowed corners of 19th century American society, Martha M. Place stands as a haunting monument to moral decay, a place where familial bonds were buried under hatred and ultimate murderous plots. Born in 1849, this woman etched a dark mark in history as the first female convict to face death in the electric chair. Her crime was not only ruthless, but sent shockwaves through the public: the brutal murder of her 18-year-old stepdaughter, Ida Place. On March 20th, 1899, at Sing Sing Correctional Facility, the deadly current ended her life, closing a chilling file in the annals of American justice. Yet, behind that haggard face and monstrous crime lay a life pieced together from fragments of tragedy, a psychological journey of instability that no one could have foreseen. Martha Place, born Martha Mattie Garretson, entered the world on September 18, 1849, in the peaceful rural town of Reddington, New Jersey. As the daughter of Ellen and Isaac Garretson, Martha's childhood should have passed quietly among vast cornfields. But fate soon dealt a fatal blow to the young girl's mind. At age 23, a horrific accident occurred. Martha was struck in the head by a sled. In an era when neurology was in its infancy, it was only known that she survived. However, according to her brother, Martha never truly recovered. The accident left more than physical scars. It seemed to fundamentally alter her personality, sowing the first seeds of mental disorder, a time bomb waiting for the moment to detonate. Before darkness enveloped her life in New York, Martha lived quietly in New Jersey as a dressmaker. The meticulous needlework was perhaps her way of clinging to sanity amidst simmering psychological tremors. There she married Wesley Savacool and had a son named Ross. But once again, happiness turned its back on her. Wesley, the man who should have been her support, heartlessly abandoned both mother and son when Ross was just 3 years old. Falling into dire poverty, with no one to lean on and a society unforgiving of single mothers, Martha made the most painful decision of her life: giving Ross up for adoption. The boy was handed over to the Aschenbach family in Newark, who had just lost their only son, and renamed William. The pain of being severed from her own flesh and blood burned deep into Martha's soul, creating a hollow of despair that no salvation could fill. In 1893, Martha decided to leave her tragic past in New Jersey to seek a fresh start in Brooklyn, New York. At 598 Hancock Street, a middle-class area of characteristic red brick row houses, she was hired as a housekeeper for William W. Place, a widower struggling to keep his family afloat. William was looking for a woman's hand to care for the home and, specifically, to raise his daughter, Ida Place. With her stern appearance and the resourcefulness of a former seamstress, Martha quickly earned William's trust. By the end of that year, they were married, and Martha officially became the mistress of the Hancock Street house. However, this marriage was not built on a foundation of love, but was a patchwork of practical needs. William married Martha for a mother for his daughter. Martha married William for status and financial stability. This cold partnership created a suffocating atmosphere within the home. From the early days, rumors of Martha's morbid jealousy toward Ida began to spread. Martha saw in Ida everything she had lost: youth, a bright future, and the doting affection of a father, something her son Ross never had. Ida's presence in the house acted like a mirror reflecting Martha's pain and failures. Every smile from the girl, every time William cherished his daughter, felt like a knife twisting in a soul already fractured by brain trauma and resentment. The relationship between stepmother and stepdaughter rapidly deteriorated from coldness to explosive rages. House number 598, meant to be a peaceful harbor, became a tense psychological arena. William Place, though noticing his wife's instability, seemed too late to save the situation. On at least one occasion, Martha's aggression crossed the line when she bluntly threatened to kill Ida, forcing William to call for police intervention. Legal intervention did not douse the flames of hatred. On the contrary, it made Martha feel more isolated and betrayed in her own home. In her disordered mind, Ida Place was no longer a child in need of care, but an obstacle to be removed so she could monopolize power and attention. Dark plots began to take shape behind cold stitches of thread. Imagine the winter nights in Brooklyn, 1898. In the silent kitchen on Hancock Street, Martha Place sat with a hollow gaze, her hands gripping household items, while Ida's footsteps echoed upstairs like a challenge. The trauma of the sled accident years ago, combined with the pent-up resentment of a woman abandoned, had converged, turning Martha into a monster hiding under the guise of a capable stepmother. No one knew that the end of the Place family was near, and it would begin with a crime so barbaric it would alter the history of capital punishment forever. Darkness was slowly closing in on Ida Place. The innocent 18-year-old had no idea that the woman her father brought home to protect her was the very one who would usher her into eternity in the most agonizing ways. A red file of envy and madness was waiting to be opened, beginning the horrific end at Sing Sing. After simmering rifts and ignored threats, darkness finally swallowed the house at 598 Hancock Street on a fateful winter evening. February 7th, 1898. A day Brooklyn's criminal history would forever mark as one of its most chilling chapters. As the February chill draped over the red brick houses, no one could have guessed that inside the false silence of the Place family, a monster had officially awakened. As twilight faded, William Place returned home from a long day's work, longing for the warmth of the hearth and a peaceful dinner. But the moment he stepped through the wooden door, that peace was shredded. There was no greeting, no affectionate gaze. What awaited him was a thick atmosphere of murderous intent. Martha Place, the wife he once hoped would be his final harbor, stood there with an axe in her hand. In the dim light of the oil lamp, her face seemed no longer human, but an entity possessed by a demon. Without a word of explanation, Martha swung the axe, attacking her husband with a frenzied strength, the result of hatred accumulated over many years. William, though surprised and wounded, luckily used his survival instinct to fight back and flee the house. His cries for help echoed through the silent middle-class neighborhood, shattering the peace of the neighbors. As William ran for the police, bleeding profusely, he had no idea that the true tragedy lay not in the attack on him, but in what was happening behind the door upstairs. When the Brooklyn police stormed the house, a pungent, nauseating odor hit them. It wasn't just the smell of death, but the smell of leaking gas at an extremely high concentration. The space was thick with mist and toxic fumes. Amidst the chaos on the ground floor, they found Martha Place writhing on the floor. She had attempted suicide by opening all the gas valves in the kitchen, her head wrapped tightly in clothing, in a desperate effort to end her life before justice could reach her. But as the officers stepped upstairs to Ida Place's room, they witnessed the ultimate depth of cruelty. Ida, a beautiful and vibrant 18-year-old, was now a cold corpse on the bed. The sight was so horrific that even the most seasoned officers shuddered. Blood oozed from the young girl's mouth, and her eyes, the windows to her soul, had been completely destroyed by a potent chemical. In addition to his main job, William Place was a passionate amateur photographer. In his darkroom at home, he kept bottles of strong acids used for developing photos. Martha, with her intimate knowledge of her husband's habits, used his own professional tools to commit the crime. She had thrown acid directly into Ida's eyes while the girl was sleeping or in a state of utter panic. This was not just a murder. It was a symbolic punishment. Martha wanted to destroy Ida's beauty, ensuring she could never look at her father or a bright future again. The subsequent autopsy pulled back the curtain on Ida Place's final moments. Although the acid had caused horrific damage to her face, the actual cause of death was even more ruthless. Ida had died of asphyxiation. Forensic evidence showed that Martha had used a pillow or her hands to stifle her stepdaughter's breath after paralyzing her with chemicals. The combination of the burning acid and the gradual sensation of suffocation created a prolonged, agonizing death. This was an act of meticulously calculated murder. Martha chose a time when William was away, prepared the weapon from her husband's darkroom, and planned her suicide immediately after to erase all traces. The stepmother's jealousy had transformed into an aggressive mental pathology where killing Ida was the only way to release her hatred toward reality. Martha was taken to the hospital in critical condition due to gas poisoning, but fate seemingly wanted her to face justice. Doctors saved her from death's door, only to hand her back into the arms of the law. When she regained consciousness in her hospital bed, under strict police guard, Martha showed no remorse. Her gaze remained cold, containing the gloom of a woman who believed she was a victim of society, even though her own hands were stained with innocent blood. New York public opinion at the time was deeply shaken. People could not believe that a dressmaker, a housekeeper, a wife, could commit such bestial acts against a young girl. The story of 598 Hancock Street quickly became a hot topic in the yellow press, where Martha was labeled the Brooklyn she-tiger. But for the investigation team, they saw a total collapse of humanity under the pressure of psychological trauma and gendered envy. Martha Place used acid to erase Ida's presence, but that very act etched her name into history as one of the most brutal killers of the 19th century. Martha Place's arrest in her hospital bed opened a new chapter of justice, a trial where, for the first time, the electric chair, the era's most modern and terrifying invention, would be called upon to punish a woman. The darkness at Hancock Street had vanished, but its echoes would lead Martha all the way to Sing Sing, where the current would deliver humanity's final verdict for this inexcusable crime. After days of treating her wounds and gas poisoning under strict guard, Martha Place was no longer the silent woman in the Hancock Street kitchen. She stepped into the light of justice as the centerpiece of one of New York City's most shocking trials of the late 19th century. In July 1898, the Brooklyn court became a hub of curiosity and outrage. The public crowded in, braving the sweltering heat just to see the monster who had used an axe and acid to destroy her own family. Throughout the wait for trial, Martha Place maintained an unbelievably cold demeanor. She did not wail or make excuses. She remained as silent as a stone statue. This terrifying silence stimulated the imagination of the booming yellow press. Reporters did not just report the case, they acted as physiognomists, dissecting every feature of her face to find traces of evil. One contemporary article portrayed her with harsh details, turning her into a character from a horror story. She is rather tall and spare, with a pale, strangely sharp face. Her nose is long and pointed, her chin protrudes like a blade, and her thin lips are tightly set in disdain. There is something about that face that immediately reminds one of a rat, a creature that lurks in the shadows, waiting for the chance to bite. Her eyes are bright but completely expressionless, without a flicker of remorse, further adding to the impression of a soul gnawed by hatred. The description of the rat face quickly became a lethal identifier. It wasn't just a label used by the press. It was society's way of stripping away a human being's right to sympathy. To the public, Martha was no longer a woman with a post-accident mental disorder, but a predatory creature that needed to be eliminated. The most decisive turning point of the trial was William Place's appearance on the witness stand. Pursuing justice for his poor daughter Ida, the gaunt father with unhealed scars became the sword of justice. William's testimony tore through every script of temporary insanity or accidental gas leak that Martha's lawyers tried to weave. William recounted in detail the simmering conflicts behind the door of 598 Hancock Street. He described his wife's morbid jealousy, her threats to murder Ida, and the suffocating atmosphere she created. Specifically, the detail that Martha knew exactly where the acid bottles were kept in his photography darkroom proved this was a carefully calculated crime. Despite the defense's efforts to cite the head injury at age 23 to mitigate the punishment, the brutality of the scene, where Ida was blinded by acid and died of suffocation, left the jury with no hesitation. The verdict was reached swiftly. Martha Place was guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. When the sentence was announced, a new wave of debate erupted, not about Martha's crime, but about how she would die. In 1899, the electric chair was still a controversial invention of modern engineering. It was advertised as more humane than hanging, but the image of thousands of volts coursing through a human body still made many shudder. And most importantly, before Martha, no woman had ever actually stepped onto that oak chair. Many women's rights organizations and humanitarian groups sent thousands of petitions to the governor of New York at the time, Theodore Roosevelt. They argued that executing a woman by electricity was barbaric and contrary to civilized values. However, Roosevelt, a man who believed in the absolute execution of the law, held his ground. He declared that justice does not distinguish between genders, and a killer, whether male or female, must pay the same price before the law. This decision cleared the path for Martha's final journey to Sing Sing. On March 20th, 1899, Martha Place was transferred to Sing Sing to prepare for the historic execution. Unlike the chaos of the court, the atmosphere at the cold stone prison was terrifyingly silent. Martha walked through the dark corridors with a calmness that was bone-chilling. Her soul seemed to have died since the night she unsuccessfully turned on the gas valves. She requested to wear a formal black dress, a dress that would later become a major technical challenge for the executioners. Because they had never executed a woman, the executioners had to meet repeatedly to find a way to attach the electrodes effectively while maintaining a minimum of decency for the condemned. But the execution of justice has no room for gentleness. They prepared plans to cut her clothing directly on the electric chair so the current could flow straight to her ankles. As Martha stepped into the execution room, she could no longer see the New York sun. Before her was the cold oak chair and executioner Edwin F. Davis waiting at the control panel. A red file full of blood, acid, and envy was about to come to an end amidst the hum of high-voltage current, closing the life of the first woman to face Old Sparky. The death sentence for Martha Place was not just a legal verdict. It became a crisis of conscience for late 19th century American society. In the final months of her life in the death cell, Martha became the focus of a large-scale lobbying campaign. Humanitarians and women's rights organizations tirelessly sent urgent petitions to Governor Theodore Roosevelt, the man who would later become the 26th President of the United States. They pleaded for him to commute her sentence to life imprisonment, arguing that putting a woman in the electric chair was an act against civilization and human compassion. However, Roosevelt, known as the man with the big stick, showed an ironclad stance. He rejected all pleas, affirming that if the law declared a man must die for a brutal crime, then a woman committing the same crime could be no exception. Roosevelt's decision slammed shut the last door of hope for Martha Place, making her a sacrificial lamb for the absolute fairness of the law. Since judicial history had never recorded the execution of a woman by electric chair, the officials responsible at Sing Sing were in a technical quandary. The original electric chair was designed based on the male form and attire. To ensure the current ran through the body most effectively, electrodes needed direct contact with the skin at strategic locations. In an effort both cruel and pragmatic, they had to devise an unprecedented method. They decided to cut long slits in the formal black dress Martha had chosen to wear in order to place electrodes on her ankles and the crown of her head. Every detail was meticulously calculated to avoid any technical mishap that could turn the execution into a horrific disaster before the witnesses. On March 20th, 1899, the air at Sing Sing was thick with tension. Edwin F. Davis, New York's first state electrician, stood ready at the control panel. When Martha was led into the execution chamber, she did not scream or beg. According to records, she walked with a bone-chilling silence, her usually expressionless, rat-like eyes now closed tight as if immersed in a final prayer. As the leather straps were tightened and the electrodes secured to her thin ankles through the slits in her dress, a deadly silence enveloped the room. Executioner Davis threw the switch. Thousands of volts of electricity surged through Martha's body. According to witnesses on the scene, everything happened very quickly. There was no prolonged struggling, no scream. Martha Place died instantly as the current passed through her heart and brain, completely ending the presence of the woman who had caused the horrific tragedy on Hancock Street. The cruelty of the case did not end with Martha's death. After her body was removed from Sing Sing, her family decided to hold the funeral in absolute coldness. Martha Place was brought back for burial in the family plot in East Millstone, New Jersey. However, no religious rites were performed, no church bells tolled, and no prayers were offered by priests. The family wanted to erase her memory like a lifelong shame. Even lying deep underground, she remained an outcast to those of her own blood. Though Martha Place went down in history as the first woman to die in the electric chair, few know she was actually the third woman sentenced to death by this method. Before her, serial killer Lizzie Halliday in 1894 and Maria Barbella in 1895 had faced similar verdicts. But their fates took different turns. Halliday's sentence was commuted to life due to mental issues, and Barbella was acquitted in a retrial. Martha Place was the only one with no escape, a grim coincidence that forever linked her name to the haunting oak chair. The file on Martha Place closes, leaving behind a story full of contradictions regarding psychology and justice. From a sled accident that altered her personality to the pain of losing a child and morbid jealousy, Martha wrote a dark script for her own life. Was she a victim of untreated brain trauma or a true demon hiding under the guise of a seamstress? The surge of electricity at Sing Sing may have served justice for poor Ida Place, but debates over the execution of women and fairness in the law continue to echo long after. The story of 598 Hancock Street will always be a cold reminder of what humans are capable of when led by envy and madness. What do you think about this case? Was Governor Theodore Roosevelt's firm decision that year an act of absolute fairness or an overly harsh action against a woman with a history of mental disorder? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear your diverse perspectives. If you find this content compelling and want to continue exploring the darkest, most mysterious criminal files in history, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. Your support is the greatest motivation for us to keep digging into buried truths. Thank you for spending time watching this full profile on the channel. See you in the next Decoding Journeys.